Welcome back to Godless and Grounded. Miracles. The word itself has a magical ring to it. For thousands of years, humans have told stories about impossible things happening. Water turning into wine, seas splitting in half, people coming back from the dead, or bread multiplying out of thin air. To believers, these are signs of divine power, proof that a supernatural force is at work. But when you actually take the time to think about these stories, they don't just sound unlikely. Some of them are downright laughable, and yet entire religions are built on them. One of the oldest miracle claims comes from ancient Egypt, where it was said that a god could turn clay statues into living servants. At the time, this sounded believable because people didn't understand biology. But today, knowing what we know about DNA, cells, and life processes, the idea that a lump of clay could just become alive makes about as much sense as believing your coffee mug could suddenly get up and start doing the dishes for you. It's not just improbable, it's physically impossible according to everything we know about the natural world. Another famous one comes from the Bible. The story of Joshua making the sun stand still in the sky to give his army more time to win a battle. This would mean the earth literally stopped spinning. Do you realize the scale of disaster that would cause? If our planet suddenly stopped rotating, the atmosphere would keep moving at about 600 kilometers per hour. Everything, people, buildings, oceans, would be thrown into chaos. Cities would be flattened. Oceans would surge inland for hundreds of miles. It wouldn't be a victory in battle, it would be the end of civilization. Yet the story is told as if it were just a casual afternoon event. Then there's the miracle of turning water into wine. At first, this one might seem harmless, but think about what's actually being claimed here. Wine requires grapes, fermentation, yeast, a chemical process that takes weeks or months. The claim is that it all happened instantly. And not just instantly, but without any of the raw ingredients. From a chemistry point of view, that's like saying someone baked you a cake without flour, eggs, sugar, or heat, and it just appeared out of nowhere. It violates every known law of matter and energy conservation. Religions don't just stick to ancient miracles. New ones keep popping up even in the modern world. There have been countless stories of statues crying tears of blood. In many cases, when these statues are actually tested, it turns out the blood is just animal blood smeared on them, or some chemical trick that absorbs and releases moisture. But people still travel miles to see these statues, touch them, and pray to them, convinced they're witnessing divine intervention. What's fascinating is how often these miracles collapse under the slightest scientific investigation, yet the faith of the followers remains untouched. A particularly funny one is the claim in some cultures that certain religious leaders can survive without eating or drinking for years because they're sustained by spiritual energy. This sounds profound until you remember basic human biology. Without food, the body starves. Without water, you're done in about 3 days. Every time someone tries to test these claims under controlled conditions, the miracle quickly falls apart, usually because the person secretly eats or drinks when no one's looking. One of the more absurd miracle stories is the claim that a prophet once rode a winged horse into the sky. Back when this was written, the idea of a flying animal wasn't too far-fetched in people's imagination. After all, they also believed in dragons. But in a modern world where we've studied physics, aerodynamics, and biology, the concept of a large mammal with wings carrying a human into space is, well, it's basically a fairy tale. Yet millions still consider it historical fact. You also get claims of people being raised from the dead after days in the grave. One famous example is Lazarus, who was supposedly brought back to life after 4 days. Here's the problem. The human brain begins to break down within minutes of death due to lack of oxygen. After 4 days, the decay process is so advanced that even if you could somehow restart the heart, the brain would be irreversibly damaged. So unless this miracle came with a full-body reconstruction and memory upload, it's simply not plausible. Another laughable one is the idea that certain holy relics have magical powers. The Shroud of Turin, for instance, is claimed by some to be the actual burial cloth of Jesus, imprinted with his face during the resurrection. The problem? Radiocarbon dating shows it's a medieval creation from around the 14th century, over 1,000 years too late. But that hasn't stopped millions from believing it's genuine, touching it, and expecting it to bless them. And then there's the miracle food stories, manna falling from heaven to feed wandering tribes, or rice that never runs out in a sacred pot. Imagine if such things actually happened today. Global hunger would be solved instantly. But somehow, these miracles only seem to occur in ancient times or in small, unverifiable settings where no cameras or independent observers are around. It's a strange coincidence that they never happen under conditions where they could be recorded and tested. Some miracles are simply too bizarre to ignore, like saints supposedly healing people by touching them with a piece of clothing. Studies have shown that faith healing works only as a placebo effect, and no more effectively than ordinary rest or treatment. Yet believers insist these events are supernatural. If clothing could cure diseases, hospitals would stock miracle scarves instead of antibiotics. What's consistent across all these miracle claims is that they rely on the one thing that makes them untouchable: faith. The moment you ask for evidence, you're told that miracles can't be explained. They must be believed. And this is where it becomes almost comedic, because the very thing that would make a miracle convincing, proof, is the one thing you're not allowed to ask for. The funny part is, when you replace the religious context with anything else, people immediately see the absurdity. If your neighbor told you their car ran on holy water instead of gasoline, you'd laugh. If someone claimed their pet goldfish could walk on land because it was blessed, you'd want proof. But put the claim inside a sacred text or attach it to a religious figure, and suddenly it's off-limits to question. Some modern miracle claims are even stranger. In India, in 1995, news spread that statues of the Hindu god Ganesha were drinking milk offered by worshippers. People all over the country began pouring milk onto statues, and they swore it was being absorbed. When scientists looked into it, they found it was simply capillary action. The milk was being drawn into the porous stone or running down unnoticed. Yet millions treated it as divine proof. Even more bizarre are stories of people's shadows disappearing, or religious leaders walking on air. These are often old magicians' tricks: wires, mirrors, camera angles, but because they're performed in a religious setting, they're called miracles instead of illusions. In fact, many so-called miracles in history could have been staged using basic trickery that street magicians still use today. And this is where the humor really comes in. Humanity has reached a point where we can send robots to Mars, perform heart transplants, and manipulate DNA. Yet some still believe in a world where food appears out of thin air, animals talk, and dead people climb out of graves. It's almost like we live in two parallel timelines, one where humans demand evidence and test reality, and another where ancient fairy tales still hold more weight than facts. Some miracle claims sound less like divine acts and more like scenes from a children's cartoon. Take the stories of animals speaking human language to deliver God's message. There's the biblical tale of Balaam's donkey, which supposedly told him off for mistreating it. While it's a colorful story, animal vocal cords and brain structures simply aren't capable of human speech. The idea that a donkey would suddenly speak fluent sentences is about as realistic as your toaster reciting Shakespeare. Then you have the claim of relics or objects that are supposedly indestructible. In some traditions, there are swords that never dull because they were blessed, or books that never burn in fire. Yet every time scientists are allowed to test these claims, the objects turn out to be perfectly normal and just happen to have been stored in ways that protected them. In reality, if any object could truly resist heat, pressure, or decay, it would revolutionize material science, and you can bet companies would be mass-producing it immediately. We also hear of miraculous appearances in food. People claim to see religious figures' faces on toast, on tree bark, in clouds, or even in spilled coffee. This is actually a psychological phenomenon called pareidolia. Our brains are wired to see patterns, especially faces, even where none exist. It's why we can look at a power socket and see a surprised face. The miracle isn't divine. It's just the human brain doing what it always does. Another famous one is walking on water. While it makes for a striking visual, the physics are straightforward. Water doesn't provide the necessary surface tension to hold a human's weight. Some scientists have speculated that in rare conditions, floating mats of ice could create the illusion of walking on water. But the idea that someone just decided to take a stroll across a lake like it was a sidewalk defies all known laws of buoyancy and fluid dynamics. And then there's levitation. Various saints, gurus, and mystics have been claimed to float in midair. The interesting thing is that such levitations are always witnessed in small controlled environments, never in broad daylight with 1,000 neutral observers and a few cameras rolling. In the world of stage magic, levitation tricks are well known and easily faked with wires or platforms. It's telling that these religious levitations share the same limitations as magic show illusions. Healing miracles are another category that's both widespread and questionable. A preacher lays hands on someone in a wheelchair, and suddenly they stand up and walk. The audience goes wild, convinced they've seen divine healing, but when investigators follow up, they often find that the healed person wasn't permanently disabled to begin with. They might have had a temporary injury or even been planted there as part of the show. Real paralysis or terminal illness never seems to get the same instant cure. Strangely, these miracles never result in missing limbs growing back, even though that would be the clearest possible evidence of supernatural healing. Some miracle stories are so impractical that they become almost comedic when you think them through. Take the claim that one prophet split the moon into two halves. Astronomers across the world, including ancient China, India, and the Arab world, were recording celestial events for centuries, yet none recorded such a dramatic occurrence. If the moon had truly split in half, the tidal forces alone would have been catastrophic for Earth. Not to mention, we'd see the scars in the moon's structure today. Yet, the moon remains perfectly spherical, unbroken, and quietly circling our planet. Another miracle that has been repeated in many religions is the idea of food multiplying to feed crowds. In one story, a few loaves of bread and some fish fed thousands. In another tradition, a single pot of food fed a village for weeks. The problem is, in the real world, matter doesn't just spontaneously appear. Food comes from somewhere: farms, animals, processing. If such miracles could happen, famine would be an outdated concept, and world hunger would be a thing of the past. But oddly, this never occurs in front of unbiased observers, and always in settings where verification is impossible. Some modern miracle claims are even more outlandish, like people claiming to see glowing auras or halos around holy figures. While it sounds mystical, it's often just lens flare in photography, dust particles reflecting light, or even mild visual disturbances in the human eye. Yet people interpret it as proof of divinity, forgetting that similar halos can be created with a cheap flashlight and some fog. You also have the miracle of incorruptible bodies, saints whose corpses supposedly don't decay. In reality, certain burial conditions can slow decomposition, especially if the body was embalmed or buried in a dry, sealed environment. Yet these cases are paraded as supernatural proof, despite there being nothing more magical about them than the natural preservation methods humans have known for centuries. Some miracles are claimed as signs of future events, like statues weeping before a tragedy or the appearance of mysterious lights in the sky. But human memory is selective. People remember the hits and forget the misses. For every miracle that supposedly predicted something, there are hundreds that didn't lead to anything at all. And often, the interpretation of the miracle is only made after the event has happened, making it more of a retroactive story than a genuine prediction. Perhaps one of the most amusing patterns in miracle claims is how they adapt to the times. In the ancient world, miracles involved parting seas, raising the dead, or controlling the weather. In the modern era, with more scientific knowledge and public scrutiny, miracles have gotten smaller. Now they're about blurry photos, vague healings, or strange shapes in clouds. The scale of the supernatural seems to shrink in direct proportion to humanity's ability to investigate it. When you step back and look at all these claims, you notice a few things. First, miracles are never universal. They always seem to happen to one culture or religion, and other cultures have completely different miracles that contradict them. They can't all be true at the same time, yet billions are convinced their set of miracles is the real one. Second, Miracles are almost always told in the past or in places far away where no one can check the facts. The ones claimed in the present usually fall apart under basic investigation. What's left is a fascinating human phenomenon: the willingness to believe the extraordinary without demanding extraordinary evidence. People love stories that defy reality because it makes life feel magical and purposeful. But when those stories are taken as literal truth, they become more than just amusing. They shape entire belief systems, influence politics, and even justify wars. And all of it can be traced back to events that, when examined closely, are as believable as a fairy tale about a goose that lays golden eggs. The most laughable thing about miracles isn't that people told these stories in the past. It's that so many still cling to them now, in an age where information is at our fingertips and the tools to verify truth have never been more powerful. We can test water, analyze relics, track astronomical events, and even record high-definition footage from space. Yet the biggest miracles always seem to hide in the shadows, waiting for a time and place where nobody can shine a light on them. And that's the real trick. Because the moment a miracle stands in the spotlight, it stops being a miracle and starts being a mystery, one that, more often than not, has a perfectly ordinary explanation.